Hi everyone, I'm Angela Fair. I'm just running a quick live video here. I want to tell you, I've been thinking lately about my beginning watercolor students. I've been teaching in watercolor now over lots of years, and my heart is always, I have a special place in my heart for people who are just getting it started in watercolor. It's a big thing to learn, and I wanted to share with you really some encouragement to help you. One thing that has helped when I'm teaching watercolor is that really, I think we think that as we grow as artists, everything gets more complicated. But the fact is that at the very root of watercolor are just a few foundational techniques. And I want to just quickly go over those today. The top questions and techniques that I get asked about and that I teach in my classes. So we're going to just switch over to my work surface right now. And I'll just set this painting aside. This painting actually is a great example of a loose and fluid style. That is my way of painting in watercolor. I want to be a heart-led artist. I want to choose to let the paint flow and to make marks that look effortless and free. And that's harder than it looks. It's always a challenge to get to that loose and effortless style. We have a combination of techniques in loose and fluid watercolor. You're going to see wet and wet techniques, wet on dry. You're going to see dry brush and some beautiful mark making as well. And so when you're learning watercolor, we get to hear a lot of techniques that, or phrases that might sound familiar to you and might be a little confusing. We hear about wet and wet, and that's just working with wet pigment, juicy pigment on wet paper, and you can see everything's very soft and flowing. And so we hear about the wet and wet technique, but often you're not sure when to use it. And so we're going to be talking about that in an upcoming workshop that I'm teaching. It's a free event, so I'm going to tell you how to sign up for that in just a moment. This wet and wet technique is beautiful for backgrounds and getting started in watercolor. You can see it gives us that beautiful fluidity and softness. When we're painting with lots of juicy pigment on dry paper, you get to see a crisper line. We call that wet on dry, pretty straightforward. As you're painting in watercolor, and especially if you're working with dark colors like this, you might start to see some pools and puddles of color on your paper. And you might even end up with one of those dreaded blooms where, you start to see the paint kind of leave cauliflowers, some people call them broccoli, these marks that look, I have a neighbor using power tools next door, and you can hear a little bit of that in the background. I apologize. Blooms will create edges in a nice smooth wash that can feel disruptive. And so we're going to be talking about how to anticipate and control blooms. We're going to be talking as well in the workshop about negative painting, how to use negative painting in transparent watercolor so that you can build up your darks without losing your light values. And we're going to talk about painting landscapes and knowing how do you know what order to paint your different elements in your painting? If you're putting color into a landscape, do you start with the background? Do you start at the top? Do you build from the focal point? We're going to be discussing that in the workshop as well. And painting backgrounds. A lot of artists choose to paint their background at the end of the painting, and then they struggle knowing what color to choose. And we're going to discuss some alternatives for painting backgrounds. Finally, as you start to paint, what happens is you build a toolbox of strategies that you get to take with you every time you paint so that you grow your skills. You start to be more confident in using those techniques because you use them over and over again. Master artists don't really have more techniques than everyone else. They just have more competence in knowing how to use them. And I just created like a really wide stem to this kind of floral shape here. Let's add some color and let it flow. For me, as a watercolor artist, the beauty is in the fluidity. It's in letting those colors move and really sing together on the paper. It's in creating opportunities for watercolor and I to work together and make beautiful shapes and beautiful moments on the paper. And I can't do that if I'm obsessed with control rather I want to have a little bit of anticipation about what's going to happen as I put my brush on the paper. And I want to be open to letting watercolor do its thing as well. Let's put some violet in there, lavender. A little more. And as I get to know my colors, I get to know what the paint will do as I have different levels of moisture on the paper. All of those things come with logging brush miles. A good instructor will help you to learn how to focus your learning based on your skill level, and will help you stay encouraged during the learning process. And an openness to the beauty of watercolor and a willingness to let it do its own thing is one of the best ways to develop a heart-led, loose watercolor style. I can't wait to share more of these techniques with you in the workshop. There's a link in the description below the video that you can click on to sign up. This is a free workshop. It's 3 days, January 30th, 31st, and February 1st. About an hour each day, and if you can't make it due to your time zone or work schedule or so forth, you will get access to the recording for the lesson, so you won't miss anything just because you can't be there at that exact moment. So do sign up. You will not be able to join in on the workshop unless you're signed up. So you do need to sign up. Click on the link below the video and do that. It's free to join, and I always love empowering watercolor students to really explore watercolor and find your own path in it. And I look forward to doing that with you January 30th here on YouTube. Do sign up down below. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.